My name's Russell Spatz. I'm an alcoholic. I haven't found necessary to have a drink since January 25th, 1981, so I'm in my 45th year of sobriety. And it's good to be here. So, we've had some fun. You guys been here for, you remember the Alky dog story? That was funny. That's a good story. Remember the $10 cruise? Do you guys like the $10 cruise? We had a little fun, you know. We had some fun. Well, the fun part is over. All good things have to come to an end. Now we're going to talk about the grown-up shit. The sixth step. Okay? And I'm going to try to do something. I'm not sure I've ever done this before, but I'm going to try to do something. We'll see how it works. Always try to bring you something. So I was talking to, I talked to 3 people today before I got up here in the last hour and a half. Braden I had dinner with, and he asked me a question. And I said, I'm going to talk about that tonight. And I said, I don't know whether you'll realize I'm going to talk about it tonight, but I'm going to talk about that tonight. And then somebody else asked me a question out there, and I said, I'm going to talk about that tonight. And then Wendy came up here. She's got 30 years. She asked me a question. I said, I'm going to talk about that tonight. And they're completely different things, but they're all really the same thing. Now I'm going to talk about it tonight. And so one of the things I asked Wendy asked me whether I believed in something. She actually talked about the Bible because she knows I'm a believer. She said, do you believe the Bible? And I said, well, I'm going to talk about that tonight. And I said, let me ask you a question. I've been around for a long time, and people have been around longer than me, and I've sponsored hundreds of people. And I've worked with a lot of people, men, women, and whatever. And, whenever you work with a newcomer and you love them and you're trying to help them the best you can, in spite of themselves, sometimes they're battling with you, Sometimes they're trying to, as you're trying to help them, they're trying to drown you. You know what I mean? And sometimes I think to myself, whenever I could say to sponsor somebody, I said, one of us is going to drink, it ain't going to be me, And, because we're sort of willful that. But, one of the things I want to do so much is I want to somehow do something so maybe he'll see things the way I see them. And I said to Wendy, because Wendy, she's got like 30 years, and and I've got like 14 or 15 years longer than she does, and not that time means anything. Of course, time means something. Don't be an idiot. It means something, but you can be a wacko at time. But I said, let's say, I said, Wendy, in the last 30 years, has your way of thinking about things changed? And she said, you ready for this? Yeah. I said, so suppose somebody walked in here with one day. How long would it take you to get that person to see the world and see themselves the way you see the world? And could you do it like in an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours? She says, no, you'd need 30 years, right? So let's say somebody walked in with 15 years, you got 30 years. How long would you have to sit with them so they would see things the way you see things with an extra 15 years under your belt? An extra 15 years of repeated humiliations, crushing of your self-sufficiency. How long would it take you to get them to see things the way you see them? She says, I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. So she asked me a question, do you believe this? And I say yes. And she sort of looks at me because she maybe doesn't understand why I believe or how I believe, the way I believe. And I said, well, you never know. Maybe in 14 years, you'll believe exactly the way I believe. And then somebody will come up to you and ask you the question. And then you could say something like, I'm going to talk about that tonight. So what I want to do is I want to try to see whether there's any way possible. It's like an experiment. Y'all like guinea pigs, you know what I mean? I want to see if there's any way possible. At the end of this meeting, you can see something the way I see it. When maybe you'll walk out and say, man, I understand. Yeah, you'll see it the way I see it. Because the big book says that what we're really supposed to do here, it says each alcoholic, using his own language and his own point of view, talks about how he developed his relationship with God. Now, I have a relationship with God, and because of that relationship, I've changed. And I see things maybe differently than a lot of people see things. And I believe things differently than a lot of people believe things. You know, I used to hate religious people. I know the Big Book says we lose prejudice against, religious people. We begin to see what they're right. I hated religious people. Well, because they thought they were better than me. I got a million reasons why. Well, if you're an alcoholic, there's a million reasons to hate people that lay down rules and you think they're judgmental and you think they're hypocrites. You can always think of something to hate people that you don't like because you hate yourself or they make you feel uncomfortable. Whatever the deal is, I don't care. And I've completely changed. How did that happen? You never catch me reading the Playboy magazine. You wouldn't catch me reading the Bible, that's for sure. You wouldn't catch me reading or believing some of the stuff in the Big Book that I believe so much now. So I'm going to try to explain something, and I'm going to talk about basically two sections of our literature. The first section is in the 12 and 12, the first paragraph. And the second section is basically I believe it's in the Big Book. I don't have the page here, but you'll recognize it. It's about something that happens to us way past the drinking. Way past the drinking. They talk about being rocketed into the fourth dimension of existence. Whatever that means. But it's real. They put it in the book. They wouldn't put it in the book if it wasn't real. They talk about being rocketed into the fourth dimension of existence, experiencing much of heaven, and knowing peace. Well, if you're an alcoholic, that seems like a little far-fetched, or, you might even say, if you're an alcoholic, well, how can I get a hold of that? It's like if you hear about a new drug or a new drink or something, I want some of that shit. You know what I mean? So I'm going to talk about those two sections of the book. And so let me read you step 6. And I'm going to talk about step 6 in that section. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about myself, because I do believe the best information you give anybody, which is authentic, instead of like bullshit and preaching or anything like that, trying to talk to people, is your own story. So I'm going to tell you my story, and maybe after I tell you my story, you'll understand why I see things the way I see things. You with me? Or maybe not. But nobody's going to get hurt. It's only an hour meeting. We're not exactly invading, it ain't D-Day. We're not invading Iran or anything, so, we'll go there. So here's what the 6th step says. Yeah, by the way, this is the step that separates the men from the boys. Now, I don't know what that means to you, and I don't know what it meant to me at 3 years. I don't know what it meant to me at 10 years. I don't know what it meant to me at 3 days, but pretty much what I think it means is this is the step that separates the children from the grown-ups. What you're going to find if you live long enough, you're going to find that. I know this sounds terrible. What the fuck? I'm going to say it anyway. That most people don't make it. No, most people don't make it after more than 20 years. That's just a fact. That's just a fact of life. I deal with people all the time that call me up that have 30 years and want to commit suicide, that have 25 years and have just drank, have 22 years and just drank. You see, when you're in a group like this with a few hundred people, it looks like everybody's staying sober. I've gone to 5 internationals. When you're sitting in an international and you see 50,000 people saying the Lord's Prayer or the Serenity Prayer, you say, man, this thing works. Everybody's staying sober. Everybody's excited and happy. When you look at it from maybe 30 or 40 years, and you look at the scenery between 20 years and 40 years, there ain't too many people standing. And many of the people that are standing, you go to an A room and you just if they have one of those birthday things up, you just sort of look at the birthday things, like 10 guys in first year, 5 guys at second, 3 years at third, and it goes up. And then all of a sudden you have gaps. 7, 8, 9, 10, nobody's there. Then 11, one guy there. Then 12, three guys. And then you say, and then you get up to, it goes to like 25, and then it goes to 35, and then to 38, and then nobody after that. And so what happens is you see that there's some sort of strain. Now you could say, well, yeah, they're all dying. No, that's not true. That's not true. And then you start getting calls, because the calls I get, you don't get calls from guys with 30 years, do you, or 35 years saying, I'm not doing well, I need help. You got calls from guys with like 3 months or 3 years or something like that. So you start realizing that there is a winnowing. There's something that happens along the way. There's a separation. You know, Bill Wilson at 21 years, and I'm not talking out of school, and I'm not putting Bill Wilson down. He wrote an essay on it. Started taking LSD. I have a friend who drank, John Kay, because he started taking Xanax. You know, I mean, Bill Wilson talked about this. He wrote an essay called Emotional Sobriety, how he went down the tubes at 21 years. I think Bill Wilson is an incredible person. Because, you know, I was thinking about it today. He was the guy with the longest time in AA. Do you know what that means? He had no one to go to. There was no guy. Yeah, Bill Wilson, when he was feeling down and out or something like that, it wasn't like, I'll just go up to my sponsor who has 40 years. There was no guy with 40 years. There was no guy with 30 years. When he had 20 years, those guys didn't exist. He was the guy with the most time. There were no guys to sit Bill Wilson down and say, shut up and listen to me. You don't know what the fuck you're talking about. Shut your mouth. You know, there was nobody to tell Bill Wilson that except maybe Ed Dowling, a priest. You know what I mean? You know, Sam Shoemaker, priest. That's the only people he had to go to, which isn't a bad deal. You understand what I'm saying? But if Bill Wilson, who wrote the book, could get to a point at 21 years where he felt so squirrely, he felt it necessary to take LSD to experiment. And then he wrote Emotional Sobriety, The Next Frontier, and wrote how he almost went down the tubes. You know? And thank God, not only he didn't drink, so we say, well, thank God he didn't drink, and he wrote a book, and he talked about it. Most people don't even know about it. And that's what you see all along in the AA landscape. You know, people think a very simplistic view at this thing. Well, the reason people drink is because they stop going to meetings. There are people that drink that go to meetings. There are people that commit suicide that go to meetings. There are people that have done the steps all over the place and sponsored people. I know intensive work with alcoholics will guarantee sobriety. You understand what I'm saying? So there are people that stay sober for 15 years and they're crazy and they're not happy with their sobriety. But they're sober because they're doing intensive work with alcoholics. One day they stop the work and all of a sudden they're drinking again. The big book says, here and there, once in a while, a former drinker says, I feel better, look better, having a better time. We laugh at that kind of crap. We know he'll try the old game again because he's not happy with his sobriety. Soon he'll know loneliness, as few do. He'll be at the jumping off place. He'll wish for the end. He doesn't say that guy has one day. He says a former drinker could be a guy with 30 years. You know what the big book says? There will come a time in every alcoholic's life where he'll have no defense against the first drink. They're talking about sober alcoholics. They're not talking about new guys. There will come a time in everybody's life that you'll have no defense against the first drink. His only defense will come from God, from a higher power. You know, that's big book stuff. That's textbook stuff. That you either believe in the big book or you don't believe in the big book. You know, somebody said, do you believe in the Bible? I said, I happen to believe in the Bible. I believe in do you believe in the big book? Well, what do you think they're talking about? What do you think they're talking about? So, I mean, a lot of people sort of slough off that. Well, that obviously doesn't apply to me. I got 10 years. You know, that doesn't apply to me. I got 30 years. That doesn't apply to me. I got 40. You know, what do they talk? What are those words? How do they affect you? Or do you go just straight to the paragraph that says, progress, not perfection, or something that makes you feel good? You know what I mean? Something that's not too difficult. You know, you go to all the good parts that prop you up and make you feel good, you know, and all that stuff. You don't really think about what they're actually saying. You know, what do they say? They say, we never apologize for God. We're never ashamed of God. We never apologize for God. There are people all over AA in every room I've ever been to apologize for God. Don't talk about the God. I'm sorry I have to talk about the God thing. I know I said God. I'm sorry I had to do that. I'll use higher power. It says we never apologize for God. What do you think the words "we never apologize for God" mean? Does it mean, well, I'm sorry I mentioned God, or, something like, well, all men of faith have courage. What do you think that means? What do you think that means? Have you ever actually thought about what that means? They trust their God. What do you think that means? That means if you don't have faith in God, you're a coward. All men of faith have courage. They trust their God. We never apologize to God. Instead, we let him demonstrate in our lives what he would have us be. And once we begin to outgrow fear. Have you outgrown fear? You're never anxious anymore? The big book says one of the promises you get is you lose fear of people and their judgment about it. Lose fear of people and economic insecurity. You guys get that yet? Big shot? You don't worry about what people think about you at any means. You don't worry about what you're going to say or whether you said it right. You never worry about what people are going to think about you. How's that working for you? Oh, but you're not drinking. You got 30 years, but you still worry about what the group thinks about you. You're not going to give this talk, right? You're not going to give this talk, are you? You're too scared to give this shit. To give this talk. You're going to talk about, well, let's have a meeting on resentments. Well, let's have a meeting on relationships. How about that? Yeah, let's have a meeting on relationships, Let's talk about sex or something. Or, the safe stuff that everybody has problems. Let's talk about the problem. So let me tell you so let me read you the two things. Here's the two things I'm gonna talk about. I'm gonna read it. The first one is this. Step 6. The step that separates the men from the boys. This is the step that separates the men from the boys. There is a separation in AA. There's a point in AA where people, you remember Bill Wilson said, God as you understand him, I can make my beginning here. I can make my beginning here. There's a beginning and there's an end. There's a beginning where God isn't that big a deal. And it's whatever I think he is, I make it up. And then there's an end. And depending upon whether you move from the beginning, that's going to determine where you are in the end. I have 3 friends that had long-term sobriety that died in the last couple of years. Steve, Al Grossman, a lot of you guys knew Al Grossman and James Hadaway. And they were my sponsors, grand sponsors. And right before they died, right before James died, an hour before he died, he was singing hymns. Sam was happy as a clam while he was on his deathbed. And I was James and Al. If you knew Al, he was doing things exciting while he was dying. Those are the men I hang out with. Those are the men. And then there's the boys. Those are them. Believe me, there are men around here and women, and there are boys. I've seen it. I know what it looks like. So I'm going to try to get, if I could somehow explain to you why I feel the way I feel. And the truth is, I don't really even know why I feel the way I feel. Who knows? I'm the last candidate to be sort of like this way, because all I was interested in is women and sex and money and power and prestige and romance and that crap, So here it goes. This is the step that separates the men from the boys. So declares a well-loved clergyman, the one who was helping Bill Wilson's sponsor, sort of, Ed Dowling, a well-loved clergyman who happens to be one of A's greatest friends. He goes on to explain that any person capable of enough willingness and honesty to try repeatedly step 6 is we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. Try that repeatedly. Step 6 on all his faults without any reservations has indeed come a long way spiritually. Now, we like to use the term spiritually. Let me tell you what spiritually means. It doesn't mean, having a candle out or humming or, any of that. Let me tell you what spiritually means. It is therefore entitled to be called, now here's what they mean by a spiritual man. A man who is sincerely trying to grow in the image and likeness of his own creator. I want you to remember those words. A man who is sincerely trying to grow in the image and likeness of his own creator. Remember those words. Most people read that, and that's the last time they ever think about it. Because it's not the steps. It's not the steps, it's just the statement. It's like a punchline. And then the next thing is this. You will be rocketed in the fourth dimension of existence and know much of heaven and no peace. The great fact is this and nothing less. Here's the great fact. That God will become the central fact of your life, whatever that means. That God will become the central fact of your life. What do I say to that guy that comes up to me during the meeting? He says, yeah, I like what you have to say, but too much God stuff. Well, what are you going to do if if God has become the central fact of your life? What if you reach the point in your life where God actually is the central fact of your life? Do I stop talking about God because I want you to like me and I don't want him to not like me? Isn't God everything or he's nothing? And the second thing in the great fact is that you're actually convinced that he lives in your heart and mind in a way which is indeed miraculous, doing for you what you can't do for yourself. What if you actually believe that stuff? You know, not just a punchline or something you read in the book, but your whole life is about that stuff. And all the other stuff they say in the big book. So here it goes. Let's go through this fast. So I come into Alcoholics Anonymous, and I am not only a drunk, and I hit bottom on Christmas Eve. Actually, it was Christmas Day at 3 o'clock in the morning. I was in my bachelor pad. I thought my life was over. It was never going to be better again. Never. I was done. It was over for me. I never thought I never thought I would recover. My life was totally unmanageable. My life was overwhelming, and I was alone. But the kind of loneliness that many of you have had before, it's like a weird kind of loneliness. Like I could have been in a football stadium with 50,000 people, and I'd feel like I was the only one, and nobody understood, and nobody knew. I mean, I was completely alone. And to make a long story short, I got on my knees, and I asked the Lord to come into my life. You know what I mean? And I'm a Jewish kid from New York. So, I mean, there's something strange was going on. You know what I mean? Why that happened, how that happened, what happened, I don't really know. I'd like to say like 2 rabbis and 3 priests showed up with some donuts, said we got an AA meeting going on, but that's not what happened. I continued to drink. You understand what I'm saying? So, by all intents and purposes, it looked like nothing happened, except some drunk who had never done it before, got on his knees, said, God, please come, please help me, and said the sinner's prayer, you know, at the prompting of a priest or something like that. So I keep on drinking, and about 3 weeks later, I get in a massive car accident, drunk in a blackout, almost kill somebody, almost kill myself, almost on myself. They wheel me in a gurney, and I'm staring up on the gurney, and I say, God help me. So I said, God help me. I remember it like it was yesterday, and something happened. I can't even tell you what happened. I can't tell you how long it happened, what had happened, whatever it is, but something happened. After I was in the hospital for about a week, you know, a friend of mine, a drinking buddy came to a friend of mine, and out of his bag, he pulled a ice cold can of Coors beer, which you couldn't get in Florida unless you knew a stewardess. And I grabbed it from it, I opened up Pop Dust, and I downed it, and that's the last drink I've had up until now. That's it. Why, how, I have no idea. Guy comes to see me, his name is Bob Sullivan, and he was in AA. And I was all set to explain to him he had the wrong guy. I wasn't the right guy. You know, I know from where his point of view, I mean, this is a guy who was down on his knees, just like Bill Wilson was down on his knees, remember? And the God came, he said, so this is God and the prophet, but he said, and ultimately, worldly clamors, mostly inside himself, blotted out his presence. I was down on my knees saying, God help me. Now here I am. I'm in the hospital after all that. And he's trying to talk to me about alcoholism. And I said, no. I know you think from where you're standing, I have a drinking problem. I don't really have a drinking problem. I drink because I have problems. As a matter of fact, my drinking perfectly matches my problems. And pretty soon my problems are going to go away, and I'm going to have money, and I'm going to have a girlfriend, and I won't have to drink anymore. So thank you for your advice. But, you know, like, why don't you go screw yourself? And that, which is sort of like the attitude I had if you want to talk to me about my drinking. But he he threw a wild pitch at me. He didn't talk to me about my drinking. He talked to me about his drinking. He knew how to do a 12-step call, and he started saying things that I started identifying with. And then he said two things to me. I remember two things. He says, Russ, you never have to drink again if you don't want to. You never have to drink again if you don't want to. And nobody had ever said, people would say to me, why do you drink? Why do you drink so fast? Why, nobody ever told me I didn't have to drink because I thought I had to drink. I couldn't envision a life. He said, you never have to drink it again. And you never have to feel this way if you don't want to. I never wanted to feel the way I felt, and I didn't want to drink. And so he got me into AA and I followed him and he was my first sponsor. And all along the way, you take these different leaps of faith. It was a leap of faith for me to get down on my knees. It was a leap of faith to follow him into AA. It was a leap of faith. It's a leap of faith to ask him to be a sponsor. Believe me, to go up to another man and say, will you sponsor? I remember asking somebody, I say, how do you get a sponsor? He says, you got to ask him. I said, what? He says, you got to ask somebody. You know how many people have come up to me and says, I was sort of thinking, well, here's the deal. They say you ought to get a sponsor and, I'm thinking of getting sponsors and there's a sponsor and they say the sponsor thing. I said, do you ask me to be your sponsor? I mean, it's the most difficult thing in the world for an alcoholic to ask for help. Okay. And so I got a sponsor and things all along the way, even as you're getting sober, you take these different leaps of faith and get involved in doing things. So I asked Bob and he says, yes. So this is what Bob says to me. He says three things. Join a home group. He says, that's number one. Join a home group. And he says, I want you to, and I want you to call me before you drink. If you don't want to don't call me after because I won't answer the phone or I won't talk to you. And he said, I want you to here's this 24-hour book. The 24-hour book at the time was the book they all used, which I still, I believe in 24. It's a mixture of the big book, the 12 and 12, and the Holy Bible. It was produced years and years ago. That's what they all used before AA came up with its book. What is it? Reflections or something like that. And since AA published it, that became conference approved. You get it? That's what conference approved is. There's no conference disapproved. Conference approved is, AA makes money from it. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm just telling you, if AA publishes it and the money goes to AA, it's conference approved. If they're not making money, it's not conference approved. Simple as that. So these means that, that 25, that's not conference approved. No, but they were just, the Bible, that's not conference approved. No, they were just using it for the first 20 years, Then Dr. Bob said the books that are absolutely essential are 1 Corinthians 13, Sermon on the Mount, the book of James. He said first things first means seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, but it's not conference approved, even though it's in Dr. Bob and the Good Old Times, which is a conference approved book. So, but the point is reformed alcoholics could be the most, they don't like religious people. The most self-righteous people in the world can be reformed. The most closed-minded people in the world are sometimes recovered alcoholics. They're in an AA coffin, and they will never break away from they'll never have a leap of faith because they're scared. And so they're bound up with the traditions and all that crap, which was, by the way, there's nothing wrong with the traditions, but you guys have been to a business meeting? The traditions were written with a group of people. The one who had the longest time, Bill Wilson, had 15 years, and it was a business meeting. They came up with the traditions. All good, but I just want you to know it was done at a business meeting with the guy with the longest time at 15 years. They still good. There's nothing, but I'll tell you, you can bind yourself to anything and be in a coffin and never grow. Never go outside the box. So Bob, my deal was every day I had to get down on my knees. I didn't have to do it. I could have told him to go screw himself. But for some weird reason, I wanted what he had. And what his deal was he went out and he looked for drunks and he was doing service. And every day I had to get down on my knees, read the 24-hour book and ask God to stay, not the higher, I had to ask God to stay sober. God's help to stay sober. And also, of course, thank him all the time and say the Serenity Prayer all the time and all that sort of stuff. So that's another leap of faith. You start doing stuff like that. You know what I mean? And the problem is as you stay sober, you get comfortable. This is what happens. He says it's easy to rest on our laurels because we're heading for trouble. So I would get comfortable. And then my sponsor would say, do this or do that. And it was uncomfortable, but I did it anyway. Another leap of faith. I would do it anyway. And so I hung around with Bob Sullivan for about 7 years, 8 years, and then he died. He passed away. So then I got a new sponsor, and his name was Joe Snyder. And he was another believer. He was another old-time guy with, 20, 25 years, 30 years. And he was like an old-timer. And the bottom line, he was like, back to basics. You believe in God. You get down on your knees. He was that deal. You understand what I'm saying? And when you hang around with those guys, when you have guys that hang around with God, you know what I mean? And believe in God and believe in the stuff in this book, seriously. And they don't discount it, or they don't think God's just like something you can believe it or not believe it. It doesn't matter, whatever the hell you think. When you hang around with those guys that weren't just making the beginning, we're at the end. And they were sober for a long time, and they were doing that. You're going to hang around with them. You're going to hang around with their friends. And their friends that had 35, 45 years or something like that, they were all like that too. You understand what I'm saying? And so at that time, I went through a real bad time in my life, which can happen to you in 10 years. And somebody suggested I go to Bible study, which I didn't want to go to because I'm spiritual, not religious. Can't you tell? Can't you tell how fucking spiritual I am? So I'm spiritual, not religious, okay? And you know what? Here's the problem is, I argued with the guy. I said, no, you don't understand. I'm an AA. I'm spiritual. I know that's bad. Bible bad. This is bad. So a week later, I found myself in a Bible study. You know why? Because I was dying in AA because they were talking about not drinking and going to meetings, and I wasn't drinking and going to meetings. They said just do intensive work with alcoholics, and I was doing intensive work with alcoholics, but I was still waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning, scared and worried and everything like that. And whatever it was, I wasn't getting it. So I took a leap of faith. I surrendered. And I wound up there, and then I hang around another group of guys. I never backtracked from AA. As a matter of fact, I went to more AA meetings, but I hung around a group of guys, and I was 41 years old, and they were 50, 60, 70, 80, and 90 years old, studying basically the basic text that they were using in AA before they wrote the big book for the first 4 years. And they were talking about the same stuff we were talking about, except they called it it wasn't necessarily drinking. It could be drinking. It could be sex. It could be all the defects of character, which they called sins, by the way, which Bill Wilson called sins, by the way. You know what I mean? And they were talking about all that stuff, but there's only one difference. All they were talking about was God. In other words, God wasn't there. Nobody stood up in the back of the room and says, well, if they talked about this when I came in, I wouldn't be it. None of that stuff. You know what I mean? None of that stuff during the first 4 years of AA, because in order to go to an AA meeting, you had to get down on your knees and give your life to God in front of everybody in AA. And the only guys that got in there, the guys that were willing to do that, they called that the surrender. So you didn't have any guys standing up saying, everybody knew what they were getting involved in. They were getting about with people that were focused on God, which is not the way it is today, unless you haven't figured that out, okay? And so I sat in there, and one of the guys I sat next to was 60 years old. His name was John Glenn, and he had like 40 years sobriety. He was a Baptist preacher, and he was he worked mission work in Detroit for 30 years, going in and out of jail. The humblest guy I've ever met in my life, the most incredible, beautiful man I've ever met. And I met John Glenn and Pat Glenn. He used to call himself John Glenn, future astronaut. Future astronaut. Stevie B talks about it. Have you ever heard Stevie B's talk? I took a trip with John Glenn. We went out to California, and they got into a real bad accident. And Stevie B, some of you know Stevie B, when they got out, they were still alive, and John Glenn pulled them out of the car, and right in the middle of the Pacific Coast Highway, they got down on their knees. He said, we got to thank God for allowing us to be saved and pray for everybody else. He sees this guy was a real McCoy. He was a real believer. And so I hung around John Glenn. I hung around John Glenn's friends. I went to that one. We went to another one. John Glenn, when Joe Snyder died, who do you think I asked to be my sponsor? John Glenn. My sponsor for like 25, 30 years. You know? I used to sit down at Denny's. I'll tell you, it's one thing in AA, hold hands. I used to sit down at Denny's with this man. There would be 100 people there in Denny's. And I'd start, he says, what are you doing? I said, I'm eating. He says, you can't eat. You got to thank the Lord. I put my head down. He'd put his head down, and he'd say one of these long Baptists. It was like a 3-hour prayer. It was a 3-minute prayer, but it felt like 3 hours, because during the prayer, while he was praying, I was looking around to see who was looking at me. You know why? Because I worried about what people thought about me, which is another kind of bondage, which is a horrible thing, which is part of your alcoholism. If you don't know it's a part of your alcoholism, if you don't know you conform yourself to everybody around you, if you don't understand you're a hoard of the world to this world, and that you just walk around saying, if I only had that house, if I only had that car, if I only had a different type of weight, if I could only lose weight, whatever it is, a newer suit, whatever it is you need, if you don't understand that is pure alcoholism. The drinking is not the problem. I don't know whether you read this in the book. It says the drinking is just a symptom of the problem. The real problem centers in your mind, not your body. It's all that crap about you're telling yourself you're a piece of crap and you're never going to be okay. The stuff that you never want people to find out about you. What you really think about yourself. But I digress. So for years, I hung around with John Glenn and the people he hung out with and went to AA and sponsored men and did all the AA stuff and also the Bible stuff, ultimately joined that church. Because you want to know something? You guys probably don't know this. In the big book, it says we encourage church membership. Did you know that? Did you know that most of the people in AA that started belonged to churches? They didn't sit around saying they were better than anybody. They didn't look down on church people. They didn't have a hard on. They lost all resentment, even for me. I'm just telling you, hey, listen, I'm just saying, you're entitled to your own opinion. You know what I mean? You're not entitled to your own facts. When you start thinking, when you got 20 years and you drink again after 20 years of going to meetings and you come up to me and you say, well, I'm really doing a 4-step. Why don't we, instead of telling me what you're really going to do, that you want to do, that you did anyway, that got you where you are, why don't you tell me that you weren't what you weren't doing? Let's talk about what you weren't doing. And you know what they weren't doing? 90% of the time, they have no relationship with God. God was just, God was just the serenity prayer every once in a while. That's what their deal was. And so these are the people I hung out with. Every Friday, I was at that Bible study at 7 o'clock in the morning with those 40 men. I hung out with them all the time. I went to another one with them. I went to another, that's the deal. And going to at least 3 AA meetings a day before Zoom. 7 o'clock in the morning, I was in the car room. It's at a meeting. At 12 o'clock, I went to a meeting in downtown Miami. And at 5:30 on the way home, I had hit another meeting in the car room of the Sunset Room. And then at night, my sponsor might pick me up and I might go to an 8:30 meeting and doing the steps. So I don't know what this stuff is about, 90 meetings in 90 days. You know what I mean? Because these guys, you know why? Because they were the men, not the boys. Because they were serious. They were serious. I don't know what you think serious is, but they were serious contenders. Their whole life was this in helping people. The only thing that was poured into them is helping other drunks and carrying this message. They believed in that stuff. They had a new employer. Whether you want to call him Jesus or God, they believed there was a God. He was the new employer, and their only job was to carry this message, the message of God, to other people. They were serious. They didn't give a shit what you thought about them. You know why? Because they weren't scared of you. They didn't worry about what some guy in the front row of an A meeting who doesn't even pay their Visa bill thought about them. They really didn't. Like most of the people in AA. Trying to make sure they don't say anything so people might be talking. I want people to talk about it. I want people to walk out of here. I want 20 or 30% of these people walking out of here saying, that guy's an asshole. The idea that 30 or 40 people could be pissed off at me and resenting me for the next week or two, it's like the greatest thing in the world. I'll walk out. I'll be happy as a clam just that I pissed you off. Really, it's great. You know how many people come up to me, I used to think you're an asshole. I used to hate you, but now I love you. You know what I mean? Because if they don't take care of that resentment, they're going to drink anyway. And if you're not pissing off 20% of people you're talking to, you're not saying shit. You're not saying anything because alcoholics who are crazy need to be confronted with their craziness. Otherwise, they just say, oh, wasn't that great? That was entertaining. Oh, I like that dog joke. You know what I mean? They're not even listening. So these are the people I hang around with. Those are the people I hang around with now. John Glenn died. My sponsor's Dion. He's a believer. I hang around with believers. I go to meetings, regular meetings. Guess what I do when I go to meetings? I talk about God. You know, I may be the only one who's talking about him the way you're talking about right now, but I talk about him. I'm that guy. If there's an orchestra, if A is a giant orchestra, you got the string section, you got the percussion session, you got the horns. I'm the God section. You know what I mean? That's it. It ain't gonna kill you. You know, not hearing this stuff may kill you. So let me read this to you, because we only got 5 minutes. Now maybe you'll understand what I'm about to say to you. Maybe you'll understand the way I think. You see this part of the book? This is the step that separates the men from the boys. So declares a well-loved clergyman who happens to be one of A's greatest friends. Clergyman, he must have been a believer, right? Don't you think? He goes on to explain that any person, maybe like me, maybe like you, who has enough willingness and honesty to try repeatedly this on all his faults without reservations whatsoever. I mean, without any reservations, not worrying about what people think about him or anything like that, has come a long way spiritually and is therefore entitled to be called a man who is sincerely trying to grow in the image and likeness of his creator. Sincerely trying to grow in the image and likeness of his creator. You see, that's not a throwaway line for me, because my whole life is trying to grow in the image and likeness of the Lord. And I don't give a shit what you think about that. That's not like, well, okay, let's go on to the next part. What do I have to do? What do I have to do in order to do the sixth step? What do I have to do? My life, that describes me. Now, am I perfect? No, I'm a whack job. I want you to know that you can do this thing and do the sixth step and still be crazy and curse a little. You can still have fun. You know what I mean? You know, you can. I'm not suggesting it. You know what I mean? I'm a professional. Don't do this yourself at home, okay? But you can get to a point where this is not only something you read, it is actually what's happening to you. I know we all like reading the Jaywalker because we all identify with the Jaywalker. You know, keeps on walking in front of a car. How about identifying with this thing? How about identifying with this when you got 30, 40 years? How about that part about you'll be rocking in the fourth dimension of existence, experience much of your heaven and knowing peace, because the great fact is this is nothing less, that God is the central fact of your life. How about identify with the fact that the only thing you think about all day is God? The only thing you want to be is closer to God. You're a whack job, you're a sinner, you do crazy things, but you're always saying, I wish I could be more like God. You hang around people that the reason you hang around with them, because you want what they have, because they're closer to God, because they're talking about God, they're thinking about God. You're doing whatever you can to get closer. How about instead of reading it, how about becoming it? You know? How about that part that says we're convinced that he lives in our heart and mind in a way which is indeed miraculous, doing for us what we can't do for ourselves? How about not only reading that, how about believing that the Lord lives in your heart, that God lives in your heart in ways that are miraculous that you don't even know about? And if you focus on him, you'll be able to do things and grow in such a way that you could never do. How about actually believing that crap? You know, that would be something, wouldn't it? That would be something. So Wendy says to me, so you believe that? Do you believe all that stuff in the Bible and stuff? I said, I don't know what to tell you, but I do. I do. But then again, I understand why you don't, because I understand that deal. I said, but let's forget about the Bible. What about this? What about the big book? Do you believe the crap they say in the big book about God? Do you believe it? Or do you think they just sort of threw that in there, but you can ignore it? You ignore it at your peril. You ignore it, you know. There are people that drink in here, and I'll tell you, I've seen the people that drink after 22 years, and 90. You know, everybody knows who Sandy Beach is, right? And Chuck Chamberlain. Oh yeah. You know, serious guys. You know what you know what they said? They said every single problem is separation from God, and every single solution is connection to God. So I mean, I'm not like the lone voice around here. So thank you very much.